Hi everyone, welcome back to Current Affairs Unfiltered. I'm your host, Paige Fullman. Finally back to a news-based episode to talk about what's going on in the world, and I'm also coming to you live from soon-to-be-occupied Chicago, Illinois. We will get more into the whole National Guard thing in Chicago later in the episode, but what I do want to say at the top is that the most concerning part about Trump sending the National Guard into cities in general is that it's creating this kind of air of acceptance and normalization. I work downtown in the Loop, which is presumably where Trump would be sending the National Guard. He's not actually going to send it to the most quote-unquote crime-ridden places. He's going to send it to the Loop so that it's publicized and everybody sees it. Nonetheless, I work in the Loop, and at work, we were talking about, what we're going to do. And it's just a very casual conversation. Like, hey, if the National Guard's here and, there's protests, then, here's our plan. That's not a normal conversation to be having. And I understand that it's work, so you gotta keep it, kind of normalized. But, that's a wild conversation to be having in a professional setting of, if the National Guard comes here, here's our plan. What? Not to mention, I commute from the north suburbs, which is supposedly maybe where the National Guard is going to be stationed. Am I going to get on the train to work and the National Guard is going to be on it with me? What is going on? Whatever. We'll get more into that later. But we're going to be talking about a whole bunch of different topics today. I haven't done a news episode in, I think a month maybe, because the last two times I tried to do one, there was just one topic dominating the news. So we're going to touch on a few things that are a little bit old, but I feel like still kind of need an explanation. But yeah, let's get into it. So first, we're going to talk about Donald Trump's newest old resurgence of an obsession of mail-in voting, or more like banning mail-in voting. Trump can truly beat a dead horse because we've been through this so many times before, but he's once again going after voter ID and mail-in voting. He proposed eliminating mail-in voting except for groups that are, ill, serving in the military, stuff like that. Trump has, obviously, as we all know, repeatedly questioned the integrity of mail-in voting, claims it leads to fraud, and that the U.S. is just unique in its use of mail-in voting. But anyone with Google will tell you that that's not true at all. The U.S. is not unique in voting. Many countries utilize some form of mail-in voting. On the voter ID front, though, Trump is planning to issue an executive order on it, but the whole thing is just so insane to me, because it's he has an issue with the system of mail-in voting as it is. He's had an issue with the system of mail-in voting and voter ID as it is for 5 years now. And at the end of the day, the way people vote and their modality of voting is determined by the state that they live in. If he issues an executive order banning mail-in voting and requiring voter ID, I'm absolutely positive that there's going to be legal challenges to it. And the thing that really frustrates me about this is that Trump has truly beat this horse to death. The horse is bones at this point, that when he's saying these things and saying, I'm going to issue these executive orders, I'm going to do this and that, people aren't not reacting with nearly enough alarm as they really should be. It's we've done this song and dance so many times. However, now he does hold the power to issue executive orders, meaning stuff like this is going to need to be fought in court, no matter how silly or frivolous it seems to us. But what's important to note is that this renewed obsession with the horse from Trump came at the heels of meeting with none other than Vladimir Putin of Russia. In case anybody was confused. During that meeting, Putin reportedly expressed skepticism about the honesty of elections involving mail-in voting. Wonder why that is. Couldn't possibly be to flatter Trump. Trump then later echoed these sentiments, stating that Putin had said, quote, "You can't have an honest election with mail-in voting." Okay. Now, when you take this into account, the trying to get rid of mail-in voting, requiring voting ID, and on top of that, the old gerrymandering conversation, which now, Missouri, Indiana, and another state, Idaho's in trouble. They're all gerrymandering. It's going to affect the midterms. Point blank, period. Now, this meeting with Putin where Trump started to beat the horse again was, I think, a little over a week ago. It's September 4th right now I'm recording this. And not much really came out afterwards, from the White House to say, like, this is how we're implementing it. I feel like they're waiting to see how gerrymandering shakes out before they start digging into the whole can of worms about how people can vote. So we'll see how it shakes out in the end, but it should be alarming to people that Vladimir Putin is saying to Trump, you can't have an honest election with mail-in voting. Putin is not our friend, as evidenced, I'm not talking about this later in the episode, but as evidenced by the fact that Putin and Modi and Xi all met together. Trump released a statement, or someone from the White House released a statement on his behalf that was like, China, Russia, and India and North Korea they're all conspiring against the United States. Okay, thank you, Captain Obvious. We see that. We know that. We've been known that those countries do not F with us. We knew that. So I'm happy that he's starting to realize it. But what I fear, I guess, is that he's saying, oh, like, they're conspiring against the US, but then, like, the minute Putin flatters him, obviously Trump's gonna be like, oh my god, love. So who knows? The whole saga is so weird. Okay, now let's talk about the National Guard. So I didn't have the chance to talk about, like, the initial DC stuff, but earlier in August, Trump initiated a controversial federal intervention in Washington, D.C., deploying 800 National Guard troops and federalizing the D.C. Police Department under the pretext of addressing a, quote, crime emergency. Now, I lived in D.C. for 2 years, and I was burgled. I don't think I've ever told that story on this podcast, but I went home for Christmas break and a woman... No, let's actually take it back, because this was my apartment building's fault. My apartment building had notified me before I left on break that they were going to go in and change the air filters. I said, sounds good. Thought nothing of it. Then, a few weeks later, I get a notification on my phone, and it's like, hey girl, thanks for subscribing to Showtime on your Roku TV. And I said, that's crazy, because I didn't do that. So call my apartment complex. I'm like, this is going to sound insane. Here's what happened. Can you please go check? Guy goes and checks. He calls me and he goes, hey, you said there wasn't supposed to be anybody in your apartment, right? I said, yep, that is exactly what I said. He said, I don't mean to alarm you, but there is a whole ass woman in your apartment. Please come. She gets arrested. Honestly, almost turned me into a reactionary Republican, because she, like, walked out on bond and, like, was never sentenced for anything, but she stole thousands of dollars worth of my things, smoked in my apartment, and she also stole, like, one plate, one spoon, and, like, one kind of those, like, bowl plates, those, like, salad plates, and, like, my bed blanket. Like, the whole thing was just so bizarre. Needless to say, I experienced a crime in Washington, D.C. And even I wouldn't say that D.C. has a crime problem. Like, that was, for her, a crime of opportunity. I went out and about in the city and didn't really ever feel really unsafe. Granted, I was out in, like, populated areas where, lots of people were going out at night. I understand that people are going to say, and it's the same conversation in Chicago, people are going to say, well, what about Anacostia? What about Chinatown? Which are two of the places in DC that do have a higher crime rate, in my humble opinion. And what I would say to that is that's not where the National Guard is. The National Guard is on the mall. They are in the, business areas where the rich people are in Georgetown. They are not stopping any crime in the places where crime is the most prevalent. So, anyways, this was at the pretext of a crime problem, but the National Guard is not in the places where crime is. So, riddle me that. Like I said at the top, I think it's going to be the same with Chicago. They're going to not send them to south and west sides where crime can be higher. They're going to send them to the Loop where they are publicly visible. The other thing was, and this was like yesterday that I saw this, the Department of Transportation, I think it was, took over Union Station, which is like the train station in DC, the big train station that the Amtrak comes into. And we're not letting people that were under the age of 18 or didn't have an ID on them up the escalator to go into Union Station, because the metro is connected, like the local train line is connected to the Amtrak train station. You just have to go up an escalator, and they weren't letting people go up the escalator. Like, none of this is stopping anything. Like, whatever. Then there's a guy that threw the sandwich at the I don't know if it was ICE or a National Guard. Like, that, can't believe I missed that one. That was also a good one. I'm like getting so off track right now. Anyways, Trump cited rampant violence and disorder that had undermined the proper and safe functioning of the federal government and the nation. Now, that could be like a lot of things. I think in his mind, he's thinking like that like press conference outside of USAID was disruption and people protesting him is more disruption and that's crime. Like, not really sure what the thought process is there because, like I said, there really is not a crime problem in DC, in my humble opinion. Like I said, I lived there for 2 years, never felt unsafe. Granted, I was not typically in the areas that are higher in crime rate traditionally, so take that with a grain of salt, I guess. But that's not where he's sending the National Guard. He's sending the National Guard to my stomping grounds, where I was bopping around. Needless to say, the deployment has been met with significant opposition. Mayor Bowser expressed concerns about the unprecedented nature of the intervention, emphasizing that the city had not requested federal assistance and that local law enforcement should remain in control. She later, I read earlier this week, said, we'll help you in whatever way you can. Mayor Bowser, I smell capitulation. She went from like opposing it to being like, what do you need? What do you need from me? That is no way to stand up to a tyrant. Anyways, the National Guard's presence in DC has sparked debates about the balance of power between federal and local authorities, especially in a place like DC that is run independently but not a state. Critics are arguing that the intervention sets a concerning precedent for federal overreach in local government. Supporters are saying he's bringing the crime down. Okay. At this point, the National Guard kind of like ran out of things to do and ruin, so they've been picking up trash. I was reading earlier this week, like, whatever. Okay. What is so concerning about this for me is, again, like I said at the top, the normalization of this situation. And even more concerning, it's the normalizing of the national troop in DC specifically. Why? Because Washington, D.C. and the Capitol is where elections are ultimately, decided, enforced, whatever word you want to use. By normalizing the National Guard being there, when we have our next election in 2026 and those results have to be certified in D.C., maybe he does another coup. Maybe the people go out and protest. And luckily, the National Guard is already there, waiting. That's what really concerns me is, a year and a half from now, my God, a year and 2 months. We're only a year and 2 months from the midterms. That's so exciting. Anyways, a year and 2 months from now, when we have that election and they have to certify it, and a couple weeks before, Trump's like, oh, we got to bring the National Guard back in. Crime's up again. People will be so desensitized to it. And, some people will be able to say, like, babe, I know what you're doing. But people are going to go, well, he did this before and, they left last time. It was fine. Like, you can't normalize stuff like this, especially in the place where elections are ultimately decided and enforced. But bigger than DC, Trump's now trying to send the National Guard to other U.S. cities, including my sweet baby girl, Chicago. Now, it does get a little bit more complicated when you're looking at other states, because typically it needs to be requested by that state's governor. So, and because LA sued Trump and this past week won that case, DC's doing the same, and I think that Chicago will do the same. But over the weekend, J.B. Pritzker, who was our governor, got on TV and was like, we have reason to believe that he is stationing guardsmen right outside our borders and just waiting to come in. So that's concerning. No follow-up on that yet. And ultimately, he's sending the National Guard I'm not going to, okay, let's back up. I'm not going to say Chicago doesn't have a crime problem, because in my opinion, the crime in Chicago, this might be problematic. I guess it's the best way to say it. The crime in Chicago used to be pretty contained to certain areas. Over the last couple years, probably, it's been spreading to more places and more populated places that like typically have people out at all hours of the night. There's an area called River North. It's a very popular going out area, I'd call it. Lots of restaurants, lots of people live there. Very young crowd typically. Over the last probably few months, there's been people walking out of bars and clubs. I shouldn't laugh. People walking out of bars and clubs and literally being beat within an inch of their life. That was not normal but a few years ago. And it's becoming more normal. No word on who the perpetrators are. Like, this is a group that's doing this and continuing to do it. But like, crime is, in my opinion, rising in areas that it hasn't risen before. Overall numbers might be down, but crime is now occurring in places that it hadn't before. And that is just my observation as a resident and local person to the matter at hand. So do I think if Trump does end up sending in the National Guard to Chicago, that it'll be in places like River North and Lincoln Park and the like quote unquote like affluent neighborhoods? Of course I do. That's what he did in DC. I also think he's going to send it to the Loop, kind of by Federal Plaza, which is a courthouse and senators' offices are there. Everything's there. That runs the government in Chicago. Of course I do. He's going to send it to places where it's going to be seen by people. He's not going to send it to the places that traditionally have higher crime, just like in DC. But I think because like there's been a lot of back and forth on this because, you know, the original thing was always going to send him in over Labor Day weekend, and now it's supposed to be this coming weekend. I think he's trying, not him, I think his team is trying to find like a legal loophole to like get the guard in without JB Pritzker's approval, essentially, because that is a little bit tough to do. What I will say is that Chicago does not stand for that shit. If there is a place where the National Guard goes in and there are protests against that and it were to turn violent, Chicago is probably a safe bet that is where it's going to happen. We are a blue state in a blue city. We love our city. We love our state. That is not something that is going to go down easily. And that's not to say that residents in DC have, you know, kind of just let themselves be walked all over, because they haven't. But all I have to say is that Chicago is a different breed of crazy. And what's overall concerning about this whole guard and cities conversation as a whole is that Trump keeps talking about sending the National Guard into blue cities and blue states, never anywhere in red states. Even though, by the numbers, there are some red cities and red states that have higher crime per capita than these blue cities and blue states that he's sending the Guard to. So, tell me that's not politically motivated. Like, I don't even have anything else to say. Let's move on to the CDC. Because that's another dumpster fire right now. So Susan Menares, a microbiologist confirmed by the Senate just a month ago, was abruptly fired on August 27th this year after serving under a month as CDC director. Less than one Scaramucci she survived. Reports indicate her dismissal occurred after she refused demands from RFK Jr. to rubber stamp changes to the CDC's vaccine policies and fire senior scientists aligned with her. Menares' lawyers contested the legality of the firing, arguing that as a Senate-confirmed official, only President Trump could legally remove her, and then Trump removed her. Okay. Should we also talk about the COVID vaccine? We can get to that later. Anyways, her dismissal promoted immediate chaos. 4 of the CDC's top leaders, including Chief Medical Officer Dr. Deborah Horry, and key heads of infectious diseases and surveillance divisions, resigned in protest. Dozens of CDC staff staged walkouts and demonstrations at the Atlanta headquarters to show solidarity with Menares and express concern over political interference in public health policy. Crazy. 9 former CDC directors from administrations spanning both parties published a stark bipartisan op-ed in the New York Times. They condemned the firing of Menares and the broader dismantling of scientific leadership as endangering public health and dismantling trust in leading global health authority. The former directors called for congressional oversight into health and human services and urged state and local governments to fill emerging leadership and funding gaps. Following Menares' dismissal, Jim O'Neill, the Health and Human Services Deputy Secretary under Kennedy, and a guy that has tech sector ties, of course, was appointed acting CDC director. Some praised him as pro-vaccine, but many experts criticized his lack of actual scientific background and raised concerns about his alignment with the MAHA movement. In the interim, the CDC's vaccine advisory panel was completely overhauled, with members sympathetic to Kennedy's views, leading to delays and confusion around the new vaccine guidelines. The advisory committee is set to meet on September 18th to vote on recommendations for hepatitis B, the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine, and RSV vaccine. The dismissal and the resulting leadership exodus are signaling a dramatic shift in the CDC structure and mission, raising big questions about the role of politics in science and public health preparedness. Now, where do I even start? So, let's start with the COVID vaccine. The COVID vaccine is now banned, I guess, for anyone under the age of 65 that does not have a pre-existing condition, which means that doctors now have to prescribe it off-label if you are under the age of 65 and do not have a pre-existing condition. Now, here's my problem. If I want the COVID vaccine, why should I not be able to get it? You know, they take the same approach with guns. If I want a gun, why should I not be able to get it? I don't understand. Like, they're literally taking... I mean, I guess we shouldn't be surprised. They're taking away your right to choose your healthcare and what you put in your body. In this case, you're not even taking anything out. Abortion. You are putting something in, and you are choosing to put something in. That should be your choice to make. Then we have Florida, who is like, take that, liberals, and is now giving everybody measles, mumps, and rubella, because they now said that they will not require any vaccines for school-age children in their public schools. I have long been against travel to Florida, ever since Ron DeSantis proved that he was a nutcase. Now, I am steadfast in that conviction, because why am I going to go to Florida and walk away with rabies and measles? What? And this issue, like, really is not even that political. Polling shows that regardless of party, parents of school-age children think that some vaccines should be required. Upwards of 70%, I think it is. Again, regardless of party, it's higher for Democrats than it is Republican, but over 70% of Republican parents say some vaccines should be required. Like, what is going on? So then, after Florida was like, take that, libs, rabies, then California, Oregon, and Washington were like, we're gonna form, like, a vaccine commission and, like, be friends, like, do this together, which, good for them. Unfortunately, where I'm at in Illinois, we don't really have... I don't think we have many takers to form a coalition like that. A bunch of states on the East Coast did the same thing. So yeah, that's so awesome. And what's like really horrifying to me, to be quite honest, is, like I mentioned while explaining, you know, the whole rundown, this is politicizing science, which shouldn't be happening. Science finds what science finds. You can't control it. And it's making a whole lot of people not trust what's coming out of the government. Like, I think it's a right to have a healthy dose of skepticism about what your government tells you. But I also think that scientific research and the scientific method is proven time and time again. Because now, when I see data coming out of the government, the jobs report, the number of measles cases this year, the number of E. coli cases this year, I'm going to look at it and go, that's probably underrepresented. Because it probably is. They've cut people and funding to all these different places. They've cut cancer research. Like, the real solution is that states that are friendly to science should allocate funding to replace these federal projects that have now been cut. I don't know. The whole thing is just so messed up. Like, I don't think people should stay in a job where they're, like, clearly not welcomed and, like, it goes against everything in your being. But it's sad and scary that all these people that, you know, believe in science, that have spent their whole careers developing these public health initiatives, are quitting their jobs. Like, which then leaves all the sycophants to fill those places. It's very concerning. I really don't have anything else to say on it. So if you want your COVID vaccine for this year, go get it before September 18th. Or RFK Jr. might tell you no. Okay. Moving on, let's talk about Texas. So back in June, the Texas legislature passed Senate Bill 10 requiring that every public school classroom display a 16 by 20 inch poster of the 10 Commandments. Don't worry, it doesn't stop there. It was signed by Greg Abbott later that month on June 21st and was set to be enforced starting September 1st, 2025. Supporters, including Attorney General Kent Paxton, argue the posters reflect America's moral and legal heritage. Okay. However, civil liberties groups like the ACLU and the Freedom from Religion Foundation and 16 families in Texas that are not Christian and do not follow the 10 Commandments to a T filed suit, calling the law unconstitutional and a violation of the First Amendment's Establishment Clause. Now, U.S. District Judge Fred Bierry? I don't know. Biery issued a preliminary injunction blocking enforcement of the law in 11 districts, including major areas like Houston and Austin. The judge highlighted that the law favors one religion and could alienate students from different beliefs. Beery cited precedent in Stone v. Graham and warned that even passive religious displays can subject students to coercion and undermine religious neutrality in schools. Some districts are moving forward with the display compliance, others are deferring to the court orders, and Attorney General Paxton, who cheated on his wife, let's start there. Isn't one of the commandments, y'all shall not adulter, shall not commit adultery? Ken, I think you did that. I think you need the sign. Anyways, Paxton maintains that districts not named in the lawsuit, so that's every other district except the 11, must comply, arguing the injunction is limited and doesn't apply statewide. So that's really awesome. Now, I then heard from Sam Smeaton, who came on the podcast a couple months ago, public school teacher from Texas, awesome guy. He said, despite court rulings, our 10 Commandments classroom posters showed up today. I could take this in so many different directions. I mean, no matter where you stand, the displaying of the 10 Commandments is wrong in a public school. First Amendment says you have the freedom to practice whatever religion you want. And I would argue that as citizens, we have the right to not have any religion shoved down our throat by government institutions, which technically public school is. Between Florida and Texas, this like whole thing, like they're just going back and forth for like who sucks the most. And the easy explanation is like, oh, they're gearing up to run for president, like whatever. But I'm just not, it's just very concerning because everything they're doing is like almost looks like it's just to lick a boot, lick Trump's boot specifically. So I do recommend everybody keep their eye on this. I think Ken Paxton is nutty. And despite the court ruling, and I understand that like maybe they are right that the court ruling doesn't apply statewide and it only applies to those 11 school districts, but I have no doubt in my mind that Ken Paxton will legitimately try to go after school districts that don't comply and put the poster up. So just so we're clear, religion has no place in a public school classroom, regardless of what religion it is. I know for Christians that constantly feel persecuted, that's a tough pill to swallow. But you wouldn't want to go somewhere and have some other religion shoved down your throat, whether it was Judaism, Hinduism, some other form of Christianity that wasn't like yours. Like, you wouldn't like it. So why would you do that to public school kids? Just because you are in the majority of people, of citizens, does not mean that you get to execute your will over the minority. I know that's basically all that's going on right now, and I feel insane for even saying that, but like just because you can doesn't mean you should. Moving on to everybody's favorite woman, Kamala Harris. Donald Trump revoked Kamala Harris's Secret Service protection, which is wild, but it is a normal thing for previous presidents and vice presidents to have some sort of Secret Service protection. What I find funny is he hasn't revoked Obama's, and like Trump would be so satisfied if Obama like kicked rocks off a cliff. Trump so despises Obama and yet hasn't revoked his security clearance, or sorry, not security clearance, his Secret Service protection. Kamala, who was a vice president and lost the election, maybe, potentially, you're going to revoke her security clearance? Like, it's such a dangerous move, considering after Trump got shot at on July 13th of 2024, Biden was like, oh shit, like, my bad, like, let's ban guns, like, we gotta beef up your Secret Service protection, like, and now he wants to go and remove Secret Service protection after he's like all up in arms about, oh, somebody tried to shoot at me, the violence, da 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 da. You wanna encourage that? Because now I don't doubt she has money to spend. Kamala has to pay out of her own pocket now to get some sort of security detail, which is alarming and a massive cost, especially to do to someone of her caliber and her status. I don't know where she lives, but unless it's in like a heavily gated community, she's going to need lots of protection to keep safe. Critics, of course, I'm critics, are arguing that the move lacks precedent, duh, and also suggests some politically motivated mischief, duh, also yes, rather than like any sort of security rationale. It's also coming at a time that Kamala Harris is about to start Kamalachella and do her book tour all over the United States. Like, what? Anyways, I pray Kamala Harris stays safe, but this is so politically motivated. Like, I understand you still got to pay the Secret Service to go do guard watch at her house and protect her, but like, I feel like if anybody asked him, he'd be like, oh, it's a money thing. Like, we need to save money. We need to cut the budget. Da 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 da. I am okay with my tax dollars going to protecting a former president. Also, revoke George Bush's. What about Dick Cheney? Dick Cheney still has it? Like he has such a vendetta against Kamala Harris. Whatever. We're going to move on. It's time to talk about tariffs again because a court slapped him down. Federal appeals court ruled that most of Donald Trump's sweeping tariffs are illegal. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit determined that Trump exceeded his authority under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, which he had invoked to justify the tariffs. The court's decision invalidates the baseline 10% tariffs on most countries and the higher tariffs on others such as China, Canada, and Mexico. However, the ruling does not affect sector-specific tariffs like the ones that he has like on steel specifically and on copper specifically. Those are going to remain in effect until at least October of this year, pending the appeal at the Supreme Court. Trump got upset about it, obviously, but this was this past weekend when everybody thought he was dead, so he was a little like eerily silent on it. And then he like came out swinging and was like, I'm going to make the Supreme Court review it. Okay, we know, like, they are up your butt and they love you, whatever. But anyways, for now, most of the tariffs are done. Of course, though, the ruling is raising concern over presidential power, which he's condensing. That's the sign of authoritarianism and dictatorship. He's condensing it. He's making it smaller. Anyways, the ruling is calling out the presidential power in trade and also those emergency laws, the Alien Enemies Act, like all those laws fall into like the category of emergency powers where the president only gets to do it if there is something wildly wrong. And he keeps trying to say for everything he wants to do that something is wildly wrong. And simply it's not. And you can tell it's not because for me, and I understand this comes at a seat of privilege. Like, I'm not an immigrant. I'm a white woman with a well-paying job. Like, I live in a blue state, blue city. Like, I go through life every day like it's the same. And that's how I know that there's no crazy emergency going on, that Trump needs to declare Alien Enemies Act, the economy's breaking, whatever emergency he's making up. And I feel like if you asked most people, like, how has your life changed from like day to day since Donald Trump became president? Like, the answer would be it hasn't. Nothing has materially changed about my life except that my blood pressure is probably elevated. That is the only thing that's changed. The other thing to note is that if this ruling is upheld, it may potentially maybe require our government to repay a whole lot of money in tariffs back to the importers. So I bet those importers are saying prayers that this gets upheld. That is all I have for this week. There was tons of other stuff that happened. Donald Trump shot a apparent drug boat off the coast of Venezuela. Like, that was a thing. RFK Jr. earlier today testified in front of the Senate that in connection to the whole like upheaval at CDC. That was a hot mess. Then we've got Gavin Newsom's tweets that he's sending out, the whole conversation around the Fed and what's going to happen to Jerome Powell. Harvard won their lawsuit. The president of Northwestern stepped down amid their fight with Trump. Like, every day, I say this every time I record a solo episode, like every day it's something new. I can't possibly cover it all. I only hope to do these as like a broad overview into what's going on, so that hopefully, if you find anything of interest, then you can go tick further into it. Everything is bad. I truly don't have anything else to say except for that. Everything is scary and weird, and I am really hoping that nothing happens with the National Guard. I am hoping that next week I'm able to go to work, and I promise you guys On my lunch break, I will take a little walk over to wherever the protests are and wherever the National Guard is and sneak a peek. I'll report back. And yeah, so keep your eye on Texas for their 10 Commandments stuff. Keep your eye on Chicago for the National Guard stuff. And say your prayers that, maybe something good will happen in the next couple weeks. Probably not. Anyways, I'm done now. Thank you guys very much for listening to this episode of Current Affairs Unfiltered. I will be back next week with a guest by the name of Matthew Adams. Matthew is running for state assembly in California. We had a great conversation about what it's like to actually run, especially as a Democrat in what is a red district. We also had a good conversation about Gavin Newsom. He's, been in the news a lot recently with his social media strategy, and he's very clearly gearing up to run for president. So we had a good talk about that. And yeah, I have some exciting guests coming up, especially for my Illinois listeners. I've been reaching out to a lot of people that are running for House and Senate. Durbin gave up his Senate seat, so we got a big race coming up. And yeah, so we got a big few months ahead of us. So stick around, because I promise these guests are good. Love finding new people to talk to, and it's so interesting to talk to people running for office and hearing their ideas and just the vision they see for the world and for the state in some cases is one that is so hopeful that I can't help but feel a little bit of that hope rub off. Anyways, I will be back next week with Matthew. But in the meantime, don't forget to follow, leave a review, or share this episode with someone who could use this information. As always, if you have questions, topic suggestions, or just want to say hi, you can find me on social media at Current Affairs Unfiltered Pod on Instagram, or send me an email at currentaffairs.unfilteredpod@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. Keep asking questions, stay engaged, and remind your parents to get their COVID vaccines before RFK Jr. bans them from everybody. I'll see you guys next week.